Greetings, my name is Oksana Klemonchuk. The Major General of the American Army Nation Guard, David Baldwin, is our guest today. Welcome to Ukraine.
General David Baldwin was the California National Guard commander from 2011 to 2022.
Mr. General, more than a year has passed since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and we broke the aggressor's plans and recaptured part of the conquered territory. Do you think Ukraine now has the initiative on the battlefield with Russia?
There's no question that Ukraine has seized the initiative, and indeed seized the initiative very early on in this conflict. We've been very impressed with the performance of the armed forces and security forces of Ukraine. And as a California National Guardsman who has enjoyed a 30-year partnership with Ukraine, I am very proud of the armed forces of Ukraine, the soldiers, and their leaders.
That is, the Russian army, which was called the Second Army of the World, is not so powerful and not so threatening now in the world?
Yeah, so, everyone, before this phase of the conflict, and by the way, I define the conflict began not last year, but in 2014, of these two armies, everyone believed, in the West, believed one army was very powerful, very well equipped, very well led, and would have very quick victory. They believed the other army was small, ineffective, and poorly equipped. They had the armies wrong. Because again, the Ukrainian military has performed extraordinarily well and continues to perform very, very well to this day. That's been the result of very, very hard work and reforms by Ukrainian senior leaders over the last 10 years.
Can you name an episode of a full-scale invasion this year that impressed you?
I think the defense of Kyiv was most impressive. The fighting in Bucha, Irpin, around Hostomel Airport, that showed the resolve of not just the Ukrainian military, but all of the Ukrainian people, that freedom was more important than living under a dictatorship and tyranny. I have two other examples that are not battles, but more broadly applied. One is the ability of Ukrainian armed forces to innovate, to develop and adapt new tactics very quickly and use them very effectively on the battlefield. The second thing is Ukrainian military's ability to change the way they lead and fight, to decentralize authority and decision-making, not at the top, but down with the soldiers, sergeants, and junior officers. Those two aspects have shown Ukraine to be very powerful.
For you, the invasion, this large-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, was expected?
So, of course, I knew the invasion was coming. My last trip here before the full-scale invasion was November, and we knew that Russia was planning to invade. We didn't want to believe it, but we knew it was coming. And many in the West thought Ukraine would fold very quickly, especially the Ukrainian Air Force. But we in California knew differently, because we had trained side by side with your soldiers, your National Guardsmen, your border guards, and your pilots in the Air Force. And we know your capability. There's still a lot of hard fighting ahead, though. And we continue to push for support for Ukraine because this fight for freedom is so important.
We'll talk about support a little later. Regarding the Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian soldier, how does he look today? Because teachers, singers, artists of all kinds, IT professionals and businessmen are part of armed forces and fighting daily. That is, they are not professional soldiers yet today.
So first of all, I'm humbled by the bravery of the Ukrainian armed forces, and especially the citizen soldiers, not the ones who are professional soldiers, but the people that join the army to defend Ukraine. This is a tribute not just to their bravery, but also to the great leaders you have in the Ukrainian armed forces, and your ability to very rapidly train and equip civilians to turn them to soldiers. And it's important to continue that training to ensure that they act professionally on the battlefield and in accordance with the laws of war.
I know that you have been visiting Ukraine regularly since 2014. For what purpose are you in Ukraine now?
So this purpose is, I retired from the Army last year. I had intended to retire 2 years ago, but I saw the conflict coming and I couldn't retire while Ukraine was getting ready to fight. Now my purpose is three main things. As a businessman and retired leader, to help Ukraine win the war quickly. And when I say win the war, I mean restore all of Ukraine's borders to pre-2014 lines. Second purpose is to assist with humanitarian demining. This is a terrible problem that if we do not have a massive effort by other countries and private donors, Ukraine will face this problem for many, many years. And finally is to assist with and look for opportunities to invest in Ukraine, to help show the world that Ukraine is a great place to do business and Ukraine is open for business. We can begin investing now. People say it's risky, there's a war on. Sure, there's some risk. But before I came here, I was near my house in California and I almost got run over by a car. So it's just as dangerous there as it is here. And I believe that if we begin investing in Ukraine now, Ukraine will become very powerful economically very quickly. But there's a lot of work to be done. A lot of laws need to change, some thinking needs to change in order for Ukraine to achieve full potential.
You said about winning the war fast. What do you mean by fast? There is some skepticism regarding the restoration of the territorial integrity of Ukraine and Crimea among American politicians and even military experts.
Yeah, so this has been a problem at every stage since this escalation began, of politicians in the West being concerned about escalation. But when you're looking in the face of an illegal invasion, you have to stand up like in the schoolyard to a bully. You have to keep pushing for what is right. And you cannot say, well, we're not going to do that because we're afraid of making the evil person mad. Because otherwise you reward aggression and evil behavior. The politicians in the West, I think, and in the United States in particular, though, are looking for what's the return on investment for spending a lot of money on arms and weapons for Ukraine. Is will Ukraine be able to achieve its goals? And then what does Ukraine do as a country after that?
What will happen to Ukraine after the victory? What kind of security system should exist in Ukraine so that Russia at least doesn't try to attack us so quickly again?
So I spent time with General Zaluzny on this trip and we discussed this. And I agree with his plans to continue to reform the armed forces, to build up the armed forces so that it's the proper size to defend Ukraine within budgets, with proper capability to be able to deter further aggression. I think that Ukraine has work to do in reforming the relationship between the Ministry of Defense and the General Staff in terms of responsibilities of what do the civilians do, what do the military people do. The Ukrainian military can improve its maintenance and logistics systems, its training and personnel systems, and then at the ministry level to improve the defense industry, and I would like to see more privatization of the defense industry. But what I find very encouraging is even while fighting the war, your leaders are already thinking about this. And I think the Ukrainian military is definitely on a path to achieve NATO interoperability and to achieve the standards for NATO membership, though NATO membership, of course, is a political decision.
What the American army is learning, I will not talk about NATO globally. What the American military is learning from the Ukrainian army.
A whole lot. First of all, how to adapt quickly and innovate on the battlefield. There is so much Ukrainian soldiers have learned about what weapons and what tactics are effective, what works and what does not work. And then I think also Western soldiers can look to Ukraine as a model of people that are bravely fighting for freedom.
Russia actively uses its missile potential not only on the battlefield, but also to terrorize the civilian population, shelling often, so cynically, residential buildings. But, as the last massive missile attack on Kiev showed, when Russia fired Kinzhals, Russian missiles were not so scary as there was something to shoot them down, and the Patriot system showed this very successfully. Even we had such a joke on social networks that the Patriot manufacturer owed us an advertising fee during the last shelling. What other defensive weapons should Ukraine have received to protect itself and the civilian population from these massive civilian strikes by Russia?
I'll answer that in a moment, but just something first. The Russian attacks on civilian targets are a war crime, and we all need to work to continue to document those war crimes and hold those that have ordered those attacks accountable. Second, I've heard the Russians say it's not the Patriots that shoot their cruise missiles down, their cruise missiles shoot down the Patriots. So we've seen very effective use of very modern weapon systems, Patriot, Javelin, HIMARS, that the West has deployed and Ukrainians have used to very good use. Next, it's all over the news, we need to deliver combat aircraft to Ukraine. We've been arguing this, I've been arguing this for over a year now. No one weapon system is decisive, but all together it makes for a more effective force, and you need more combat aircraft, because again, your pilots are very good, but they need modern aircraft to face the Russian Air Force. But in addition, Ukraine needs just very basic stuff, more trucks, more ammunition, spare parts, armored personnel carriers, simple tools that your soldiers can use very effectively to win this war. And it's a good investment by the West to continue to allow the Ukrainian military to win, to buy time for the Ukrainian armament industry to strengthen, and for the economy to get moving again. But back to aircraft, we need to deliver F-16s now.
Why does it take so long for Ukraine to receive this dream F-16s?
So it's been a political decision, and it goes back to what I talked about earlier about politicians worrying about crossing this line and causing escalation. You know, first it was hard to get javelins, then HIMARS, then more ammunition and support. But every time we draw the line, Ukraine steps over it, and there's a new line, and more things are possible. So that is strictly a political decision that took that long to be able to do it. Had we made the decision last year, Ukraine would have already had the aircraft, pilots would have already been trained, and they would be flying very effectively and shortening this war. We need to do everything we can to help Ukraine win the war and win it quickly, because every day that goes on, needless men, women, and children are dying that don't need to die if we can end the war quickly.
President Joe Biden said that F-16 would not have helped in Bakhmut anyway. Why?
I don't know why he would say that. Because if I, as a military commander, having F-16s overhead helps in many ways. Helps protect against enemy aircraft, and they can be used effectively in air-to-ground strikes. Again, it's not the one weapon that's going to win the war, but it helps.
And do the American army, let's say, or the American political community understands or doesn't understand that the Russians can be stopped only by force? Otherwise, nothing works.
We've tried all the other means. We've tried diplomatic, we've tried economic. The playground bully understands one thing, they understand force. I want to go back to 3 other arguments people use to say no F-16s. One, that the Ukrainian airfields are too damaged, too rough, and too short to fly F-16s. 2, that Ukrainian maintenance people cannot maintain these sophisticated aircraft. 3, Ukrainian pilots aren't good enough to fly them. None of those are true, especially the 3rd one. Because if Ukrainian pilots have been so effective flying older aircraft against more modern Russian aircraft outnumbered, imagine what they can do with F-16s. So I'm hopeful that soon we'll have F-16s. I do know there's Ukrainian pilots training to fly F-16s now, and that's very good.
I just wanted to ask if we already have Ukrainian pilots ready to fly the F-16.
There are pilots that are beginning to train, and it will take time, but they'll do very well. And it won't take much time because the pilots are very good. It's just a different airplane. It's not magic.
What is the assessment that Russia would launch a nuclear strike?
So this is a decision that would have to be made by a very, very evil, desperate person. And I remain hopeful that even in defeat, Russia will not cross that line.
Russia is also waging an information war in the world. How is Ukraine behaving in this information war? Are we winning or losing?
I think Ukraine has been extraordinarily effective in the information war, and what you do here has been very well received in the West. I think that people recognize that you do it professionally and for good aim, and then you see what the Russians do, it's like comedy. I think it's been very helpful in painting a picture of what's going on, showing Ukraine's resolve. I just recommend you add now the economic aspect that even with the war, people can come and invest in Ukraine now and get the economy going.
And my last question. While preparing for the interview, I saw how much you have studied. You started with microbiology at Stanford University. Should you study so long to become a general in the American Army?
So yes, as now it is. And that's one of the reasons that makes our Army so powerful, is not just generals, not just colonels, but sergeants now must have degrees, or we encourage them to have bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and the really smart guys even PhDs. And I encourage Ukraine to consider the same model, because it's as important to train your soldiers to think as it is to fight. And this is one reason why the Ukrainian Army has been so successful, is you allow your soldiers to think.
Thank you. Major General David Baldwin was our guest.
Thank you very much.